I had a coach come to me frustrated that his most powerful athlete, strongest in the squad, best gym numbers by a distance, was still getting beaten for pace by players half his size. Same session, same effort, same program, different result. And the reason had nothing to do with the athlete. It had everything to do with the fact that not all training lands the same way for every athlete. Here's something most coaches never stop to ask. You've got a squad of 20 athletes, different bodies, different histories, levels of development, and they're all doing the same speed session. Same drills, same distances, same intensities, and you're wondering why some are improving and some are not. The answer isn't effort, it is an attitude. It's that not all training lands equally. And without a way to diagnose where each athlete actually is, you're guessing. So let me show you what I mean. We have these axes here. On one level, we have physical preparedness. Okay, so we have an athlete's level of physical preparation as we come through here. And this line here shows our motor potential, how well the athlete can actually express speed. Now, here's your classic strong but slow athlete, sat right there, high up on the physical preparedness side, but his motor potential is lagging so far behind. They can squat the house and they can deadlift, they look powerful, but on the field, they're not fast. And most coaches respond by putting them through the same speed session that everyone else does. Now, you must be able to agree with me. If we've got someone strong, really slow here, and they're doing the same session as someone who is using their motor potential more in accordance to their skill, that they're going to get the same result. It's completely wrong. It's not going to happen. So this is what's really important, that the training itself actually isn't wrong. The diagnosis is. So before you program a single speed session, you need to know where your athlete sits across both these axes. Are they physically unprepared? Are they strong, but from a motor potential level, are they undeveloped? Are they somewhere in between? Because the answer to that question changes everything about what they need next. So audit your current performance metrics. Look at both physical preparedness and motor potential together, and then ask honestly whether your training is building speed or just building around it. So an example for that is, how do we determine the gap and how are we going to show preparedness versus motor potential? It's a really simple way. We can use something like a back squat. A back squat as our motor potential, okay, as our motor potential metric. Now, our preparedness and our skill derivative, our simple skill exercise we could use, is a broad jump. Okay, because what we know is that there is a direct transfer to a point of the strength of a back squat to a broad jump, which could intersect this relationship here slightly, so we know that our motor potential is transferring, okay, towards the skill, because we know if someone can broad jump well, they're most likely to accelerate well. Maybe even if you had sprint gates or sprint times, you can audit them against one another. So that helps us ask the question, where do they sit on the curve, with some very simple tests and metrics. So we need to understand this so we don't make the common mistake that most coaches make with beginners. Okay, so let's take a little look at what a beginner is like. The beginner athlete, fresh to speeds training, still developing their physical foundation, and usually the one coaches are most tempted to push the hardest, because the gap between where they are and where they need to be feels urgent to close, and that urgency is exactly what gets them into trouble. Because here is what happens when you run a beginner too fast, too soon. look at this curve. Okay, this curve, we like curves on this channel, shows a very simple thing. Okay, this is the relationship between time and intensity needed to create exposure. So what happens, we typically think they need to run as fast as possible, and they respond to almost every sprint stimulus because everything is new. Their nervous system is adapting to the force production, that's converting to speed, and progress feels easy. But if we push the intensity too high, the curve flattens out. So what actually we need with a beginner is this level of intensity down here, okay, 100% for argument's sake. This level of intensity is going to create the adaptation that we need, and we can use a little amount, a little amount, a little amount, and they'll keep progressing because everything's new. But what happens if we just go, right, for argument's sake, you're going to do towing, overspeed sprints? We've given a beginner the intensity up here, and it's going to completely shut them down, and that response gets blunted. But here's the part that even really hurts. If we keep giving a beginner the stimulus up here, by the time, if they've not broken and blown up, by the time they get to this desired part of the curve, this intensity won't work because it won't land in the same way as it should, because you've already spent that currency, okay? You've already spent that load. And the frustrating thing is that most beginner athletes don't need more intensity. They don't even need harder sessions or heavier loading. They already possess the physical qualities to improve their speed because they are already a functioning human being. What they don't have is they don't have the motor potential, because they have the strength, the power, the raw materials, they're already there. What they don't have is the structured exposure to sprint movement that gradually unlocks it. It's all about sequential loading. So the beginner athletes resist. So with a beginner athlete, resist the urgency. Build a progression of exposure that starts at a speed where they can actually feel and learn the movement, and then let adaptation do the job. The speed is already in there. Your job is to create the environment to bring it out, because once a beginner starts moving through that progression, they enter a different stage entirely, and that's where the coaching problem changes. As we move from beginner, we start to look at a more developing athlete. This is the one that catches most of the coaches off guard, because on the surface they look like they should be fast, they're strong, they're powerful, and they've been training for a while, and yet there's still a gap between what they look like in the gym and then what they can produce on the field. The metrics are not quite stacking up and complementing. We're not getting the transfer, but we've got the adaptation. And because coaches get stuck here, they're not sure whether they keep needing to be pushing down here or push really harder into something new. We're reliving a little bit of the same mistake, but we've got a bit of results already, some speed improvements, but it just becomes a very middle sticky ground of speed development. And at this stage is where the coaching problem fundamentally changes. Let's come back to this adaptation curve. Here is where you're beginner. Steep, nice early beginner gains, not a lot of too intense stimulus, and now your developing athlete, okay, is still moving upwards, but the curve is starting to require a little bit more. All right, so we've gone from, let's lose the arbitrary percentages. 20% is moving the needle. Now we're at 40%, and we're starting to find this middle zone of how we can push that up. So the gains from basic exposure are drying up. But what's really important, if you've followed the process, it means that you've used all of them really, really well. And your athlete has got some really good speed preparation done. So the athlete does need a different kind of stimulus to keep adapting, but they're not at the top yet. and there's still a significant speed available if you apply the right tools. And that tool is very simple. It's sprint variations, because at this stage, speed improvement stops being purely about the skill development, closing up this space, and the problem becomes a loading problem. The athlete can sprint, they understand the movement, and now they've built the foundation. Now you need to use variations of sprint work to load qualities deliberately. So this is where this phase comes in, because what's happened, we've gone through this stage 1 here. Now we have a flat line, for example, and this stage is all underneath here. It's that base. But we've still got to develop that, because there is skill learning to happen, because the faster you get, the faster you need to learn how to run fast, if that makes any sense. So we use variety. We're using flying sprints, resisted runs, some cone work, wicket work, contrast methods. These are all stimulus that keep the developing athlete moving on that curve, and we beat something known as the law of accommodation, which is for a later video. So you need to stop treating a developing athlete like a beginner from a skill perspective. Don't jump them to the advanced methods too soon, because they're not ready for it. You just need to find that little bit in the middle, use the fundamental principle of variation, a bit of smart programming, and then you can load them accordingly. And now once your athlete has moved through that developing stage, and we know that, because obviously as someone gets better, the rate of progress is going to slow down, so it is going to take a bit longer to improve, and that's fine. But if we're monitoring appropriately and we're looking at the metrics as we go along, as soon as that progress starts to slow down, we then go, right, the problem's changed again, and now it's time to look for more advanced athletes. But before we get into that, I want to illustrate something too, really important. We've got the beginner, intermediate and advanced athlete. This is not a 6-week program. This is over years. Okay, this is a very long progressive timeline. This, especially in a team sport athlete, this could be their whole career. I worked with an NFL player who was in his late 20s, trained his whole life, and we still were using the modalities of beginner speed training to achieve lifetime best. Okay, so it's all important to understand the bigger perspective of here. So let's look at the advanced athlete, because really this is the one the coaches are most proud of, and ironically the most commonly that they overtrain, because just because they can do it doesn't mean that they should. And because the instinct with an advanced athlete is that they're already good. More work will make them better, more volume, more session, more sprint reps. And for a while that logic holds, but at this level, this is where volume starts being part of the problem. Here is what happens. So over a period of time, and if we look at this from a seasonal perspective, early in the season it's manageable, the athlete is fresh, recovery is good, adaptation is happening. Okay, and if we run a median line of the volume here, and this is where freshness and fully recovered is, they're able to tolerate it. But over a period of time, the more volume that we get, we actually start to exist in a fatigued state, because this just compounds over time, and performance will actually start to decrease, because if we've kept adding volume week on week, fatigue starts to outpace adaptation, and this is the relationship between freshness and fitness. The athlete is working harder than ever, and the speed gains have stopped. And what's even more worrying is the athlete will start slowing down and become a very, very high injury risk. And most coaches respond to this actually by adding more, because that's what's worked before. But the more volume on top of the accumulated fatigue doesn't produce speed, it just produces more tired athletes. The advanced athlete doesn't need more, they need better. And at this level, volume becomes a recovery tool. You maintain it to keep the athlete physically prepared and moving well. but you stop expecting it to drive improvement. Intensity is what drives improvement at this stage. Precise, high quality, sprint stimulus with enough recovery built around it to actually adapt. 1 or 2 genuinely high quality speed efforts properly recovered will do more for an advanced athlete than 5 mediocre ones buried in fatigue. Maintain the volume but chase the intensity, because at this level it's the only stimulus that moves the needle. And we can look at this by another simple graph. This is known as conjugate sequencing, and we have levels of intensities of exercises. So our beginner exercise, okay, the type of exercise, these two are going to work. The intermediate, these are going to work. Then the advanced, these are going to work because we've tapped into that level of intensity which allows them to improve. But the thing is, if we give them the same volume that a beginner has with that intensity, it's a recipe of disaster. So now we've got 3 completely different athletes: beginner, developing and advanced, all needing a completely different approach. And that's exactly the point. So let's bring this together. Should every athlete sprint the same way? No. And now you can see exactly why. The beginner needs structured exposure to unlock the speed that they already possess. The developing athlete needs loading through sprint variation to keep adaptation moving. The advanced athlete needs precise intensity with volume used as a recovery tool, not as a developmental one. 3 athletes, 3 different problems, 3 completely different solutions. And coaching them all the same way is why most squads have athletes who never reach their full potential. This is the foundation of what I call speed age. Not chronological age, not training age, but where an athlete actually sits in their speed development journey. And once you can identify that, everything about how you program, select exercises and sequence progression becomes clearer. But here's the thing, knowing that athletes need different training is one thing. Knowing what actually makes them faster, the specific physical qualities that drive speed improvement at each level, now that's a different question entirely. And it's one most coaches have never properly answered. And that's why we're going to look at that in the next video, because once you understand what's driving speed at a mechanical level, you'll know exactly which lever to pull for every athlete in your squad, regardless of where they sit on the speed age scale. So I'll see you in the next video.